My name's Ryan with the R&R Law Group. One of the questions we get asked sometimes is, why do innocent people take plea deals? And that's a tough question. And it's a very, very tough question to answer and to talk about. One of the things that I always talk with clients about is, in order for me to allow you to enter a guilty plea, you have to tell me you did something wrong. Okay. For instance, I just had a case that we took to trial, and thankfully, we won because the client told me from the get-go, I didn't do what they're claiming I did. I said, then I cannot let you take a plea deal. But there are people who are innocent that do take plea deals, and the reason being is because in Arizona, sometimes the penalties are so harsh that it's not worth the risk. So if you think about a risk versus reward type of mentality, you think about the fact that if I go to trial and lose, my minimum penalty is 5 years in prison. And then you're presented with a probation deal. Sometimes people will just say it's not worth the risk to have 8 people decide whether the facts are the way they're presented or whether the facts are presented the way that I believe them to be. And they take that deal. And I don't blame people for that. I think that it puts people in a very harsh predicament when we have these mandatory sentencing guidelines that make you go to prison if you go to trial and lose on certain crimes, even if you've never been in trouble before. And it's something that's very tough that happens. And for instance, I can think of a case that we had probably about 10 years ago. And, it was one where, we ended up with, it was a very bad felony that he was charged with. We ended up with a very good misdemeanor plea deal. And the way that we had to do it was that we made the factual basis. That's what happens when you take a guilty plea. The judge asks for a factual basis. You get to the end of it, and the judge will say, counsel, factual basis, please. And then it's my job to say, judge, on or about the date alleged in the complaint, so-and-so did X, Y, and Z. Okay. And we had to make a very certain set of facts that a client could admit that he did that fit the factual basis to allow him to plead guilty to that misdemeanor. And honestly, it was, I would have loved to have gone to trial for it, but that's not my decision to make. The client's decision is the one who gets to decide whether they're going to plead guilty or not plead guilty. And if we went to trial, he was facing years and years and years in prison. So this probation deal, got him no jail time, minimum probation, and then he was done. Now, do I think that he actually did anything wrong? No. But could he agree with the facts that we presented to the judge as to what that crime was that was amended to? He could agree to that, and he could say that he did that. And that's what you have to have in order to have that factual basis. So the real question is, if you didn't do anything wrong, how can you take a plea agreement? But that's where the factual basis comes in. And it's the same thing, right? If you, if you punch somebody in the face and it was an assault that was the charge, you can't plead to a DUI, because the facts don't fit the case. So you have to actually have a set of facts that your client can agree to that they did in order to accept a plea agreement. And the biggest reason why people take plea agreements is to avoid what the potential consequences are at a trial if you were to lose. And again, this mostly happens in felonies, because when you have felonies, you have mandatory sentencing. And that sentence is something that people look at and say, that risk is not worth it to me for what I'm getting under the plea agreement. So it's almost like a risk versus reward type of balancing act that you do. But a lot of people will look at that and say, I don't want to take that risk of going to trial. I just want to accept a plea agreement. But you have to make sure that you can have the facts that can back up something that you can say, this is actually what I did, in order for a judge to take that guilty plea. So it's a tough spot to be in. I don't envy it. Obviously, innocent clients are the most scary clients that we have, because you're trying to defend somebody that you believe is innocent. And it's a tough place to be in. But, if you've been charged with a crime and you need some help, give our office a call. We're here to walk you through it.
Thanks for joining us today. If you found this video helpful, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more valuable insights. We'll see you in the next video.